Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I'm really excited that all of you have joined the program today. Our guest is Alex Whittington, a futurist and my colleague here today. Thanks for joining us, Alex.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Now, for those that don't know, futurists get to work on really interesting projects. And I know that I've got a ton of projects I'm working on now, Alex, too. So we'll just kind of talk about the world of futurism here in a little bit as well. But let me dive in. In addition to being a futurist, she is a writer and speaker with a particular focus on the future of humanity and society. She has served as a lecturer at the University of Houston, where she taught courses on foresight. She has co-authored and co-edited several books on the future, including A Very Human Future, Aftershocks and Opportunities, and The Future Reinvented. She has also been featured as one of the world's top women futurists by Forbes and delivered a TEDx talk called the Museum of the Future. What a cool name. I wish I could have watched that. Probably still can. I need to watch that then. So again, thanks for joining us, Alex.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me back.
And where are you dialing in from today?
Well, as usual, I am dialing in from the Houston, Texas area. I live in the exurbs of Houston, so it's pretty quiet out here. When I was in the city, we always had all that background noise, but now it's nice and quiet.
All right, so I'm calling in here as usual from Boise, Idaho. So let's jump right in. So you and I both wear badges that say we're futurists. But one of the downsides of being a futurist is it's really difficult to read the news like a normal person. Do you find the same challenge?
Yeah, that's really interesting because in my years of teaching, I would see that was one of the quickest things to kind of flip in a student's foresight journey, right? Once you start noticing signals and cultural shifts and technology and science breakthroughs happening, you start to take note of that. So you really don't read the news the same way. You sort of file it away and put it on that back burner and so you can think about later, well, how does that connect to other things? What does that tell me is changing? And not only that, but we have this like broader viewpoint where we can put a news item into this like bigger context where, I'll read something today about, the future of pharmacy, like some drug or medical breakthrough. And it's great, right? Medically, scientifically, that's really like a step ahead. But I'm also thinking, what does this mean for like housing? How's this going to affect transportation, right? What are cities going to do in response? So that's one of the ways that we see the news differently. It's not just a piece of information anymore. It's a pebble falling into, a pond that you see all these reverberations and circles, reflecting out from it. So
Yeah.
we're a little dramatic that way.
It's like 10 pebbles hitting the pond at the same time or at different
Yeah.
times. And you're going, okay, so how's that going to do this and how's that? My wife keeps me balanced because by nature, I'm just very optimistic. So I see some new technology. I'm like, look, it's going to change the world for the better. And my wife goes, wait a minute for a moment. What's it going to do for everyone else here that doesn't get it or can't afford it? Or, all these kinds of things. So she keeps me balanced when I read it. But yeah, I mean, it's like before we became futurists, we could read the news without purpose. Now it's like we're scanning. We're scanning for what are we learning today? What's this tell us? Is this a pattern that we've seen over time? All of that fun stuff. Wow. So what are you seeing in your scans today that you think is particularly maybe interesting or important?
Great question. I love to be asked this question. Well, something that I was actually just discussing with one of my futurist colleagues that I've co-authored an article with a couple of years ago now. She and I and another co-author put together this piece called 5 Kids from the Future. And it was actually in Forbes. It was a pretty nice little piece. It was fun and catchy. And we're all three, female futurists interested in all kinds of topics. But in this case, we talked about, what are kids going to be like, over the next couple decades. So one of the things that Joanna, my colleague, proposed in that article is this idea of DigiKid, right? It's a child from the future that's not actually human, right? Maybe like an AI kid. And that's actually happened in real life now. Recently, Joanna shared on social media, and she tagged me in the post. She said, "Look, DigiKid is coming to life because China has just unveiled the first AI child." So it's got this really interesting purpose. The Chinese AI child is to help us learn more about AI and how it's taught, right? These ways that computer scientists have of teaching an AI that involve like that reinforcement learning and supervised learning and all that kind of stuff. They're looking at it from that perspective of how does this child, quote unquote, learn? So I think it's a really cool scan hit, right? A little ding on our radar telling us something is changing, that we might see childhood as kind of a symbol of how AI works, right? The not childhood, but the way a child learns and grows and develops. And if that becomes kind of I don't know, the symbol or the reflection of AI, will we think about it differently? I mean, this is something I've contemplated. If it learns from us and we teach it, do we need to take on like a parenting style when it comes to our AI, right? Do you want to be an authoritarian parent? Or are you going to be one of those like soft parents, gentle discipline? It kind of opens up a whole new world of relationships with AI and with technology. So I think that AI child is worth looking into. It was in the Chinese media. Haven't seen a lot about it myself in the English speaking world. So it'd be cool to look up and see what's happening on it.
Any other scans that you think is
I'm
fun?
always looking at, things around education and kids learning experiences and stuff. And, something that I'm eternally curious about is how nature can serve as a learning environment for kids. So there's been some stuff lately with these like really cool architectural designs that I've seen for like schools of the future. How could you integrate nature more into the classroom by having these really cool, like, open air classrooms or modular. So yeah, I like to get inspired by architectural visions for futuristic buildings, in this case, schools, right? And how they could integrate more nature, more calming things. It's not just that it helps kids learn, but it actually helps all of our mental state psychologically to be exposed to nature. You're a big nature lover, this, right? Being out in nature is restorative.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You have creativity. You can just get so much out of simple things like just walking through the woods or something.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Here in Idaho, that's kind of a favorite pastime of everyone, is to spend as much time out there as possible. So one of the things that can happen when you're scanning is if you're scanning as a layperson, oftentimes it just seems like a crazy, uncertain, chaotic future, and it's really frightening. Let me just ask you, as a futurist, I think some of the expectations is that we help bring order to some of that. We can, look for patterns and look for ways of somehow being able to just organize that uncertain future. Why don't you share just some of the ways you might do that?
Yeah, well, in the scanning practice that's been around for, some 50, 60 years, however long futurists have been a thing, scanning has these different, like, I guess, tools you can use. I mean, one of them is an acronym called STEEP. This is very widely used, and that's where you can kind of take the signals that you gather or observe and sort them into these categories. This mnemonic STEEP stands for society, technology, environment, economics, and politics. Here at FOB, we use something very similar, right? We look at it in terms of societal, technological, geopolitical, and economic, and then we have a scenarios category. So, kind of each futurist, I guess, will take their own approach, but there's ways of organizing the information that we take in so that you can ultimately do something with it. I like to keep bookmarks on my computer. It's really simple. I just use bookmarking techniques, or there's something called Google Collections where you can save links. And there's a number of ways of saving links online. And it serves to collect our research, right? So we can organize, so we can build on what we know. We can start to detect patterns, like you mentioned, and also start to tell when things are changing, when something new starts making its way into your bookmarks and your source material. You're onto something, right? You start thinking, this is different. I'm going to see where this goes. So putting order to the scanning material itself can be achieved with digital tools. It can also be a mental model like the STEEP or whatever acronym you choose to use. But I think something we've done on FOB that's been really helpful is collaborating with scanning. As you know, much of last year, we spent time as a group meeting to talk about what we were learning about AI, right, specifically. So doing that sort of collaborative, dynamic group thing around scanning is very helpful because it can help you question your own mental model
Mhm.
in terms of, am I locked into a way of thinking? Am I not seeing? I mean, we all have our own biases. So it really helps to break down those biases and help the futurists interpret these signals in a more analytical way, a multi-layered perspective way, right? Because it's those different perspectives that help us shed light on what we think we're observing. Because sometimes, especially in scanning, we'll see something and think, oh, this is brand new. This is so cool. This has never happened before. And then once you start doing some research, you're like, this is just new to me. I've just never heard of it before. This has been around forever.
Yeah.
So it's really good to have that reality check of your colleagues. And I recommend that everybody who's interested in keeping a pulse on the future, start a group, right? Get some people together, whether it's at your job or just in your community or whatever, online friends, and share what you're seeing and figure out, do that sense making together. I think it's way better collectively.
Now, in my experience, whenever you get a group together and talk about the future, it tends to go dark and negative. And so I think it's a good idea to do that, just like you said. But how do you keep it balanced? Because I think human nature is fearful of change. And so it's like, here's a cool new thing, and all of a sudden, the only thing people can see about it is, the potential nefarious intent or something. How would you balance that? Do you have any ideas for us?
Well, I just think it's really important to make space for that and to let people, it can be cathartic to say, this scares me.
Yeah.
I'm worried about this. And to let other people validate your fears and say, yeah, that is scary. But it's ultimately empowering. It's like facing your actual phobias or something in life. It's empowering because you can verbalize it, you can then move on to more proactive measures, right? And I've often, especially in my classes when I was working with young people who tend to really get that doom and gloom part, it comes really quick, as you said, especially for young people, because they look at the world and they think, oh my God, what's the point? Everything's so bad, But once you let people get that off their chest, and I would build this into an early class meeting, right? What do you see? What do you sense? What do you like? What do you not like about what you think the future could be, right? Let's just talk about it. And I think once people get that out of the way, then you can move on to a productive, proactive, optimistic conversation. But we can't pretend like that negative side doesn't exist and ignoring it.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. So in a recent article that you wrote titled New Year's Resolutions question mark Uncertainties at a Tipping Point in 2024, you discussed three trends near their tipping point: geoengineering, gen beta, and utopian smart cities. Tell us about those, Alex.
Yeah, those are ripped right from my scanning. Those are great examples of the kind of things that kind of start coalescing into a theme as you start scanning. You start seeing these things over and over. So I decided at the beginning of the year, New Year's resolutions has a double meaning in that title, because what I'm talking about is not so much, it's the beginning of the year, let's make some resolutions. Because I have seen so much on these three particular things, my resolution there was, are these about to resolve, right? My use of the word resolution was more about, are these about to be resolved? Because they're kind of ideas that are out there, they've been around a while, you see a lot of progress happening on them. Are they about to fall one way or the other? Because typically what we're scanning are things that are happening, but they haven't necessarily had their full effect on society or on business or whatever it is we're looking at. So let me just explain kind of by talking about the different examples. I think the first one there was geoengineering. And geoengineering's been around for a long time. I mean, I think it's been floating around in the discourse for, I would say, at least 20 years. It's this idea that we can engineer our way out of these climate change challenges that we have. So one of the wackier, I would call it wacky type examples, something we were discussing the other day, Kevin, was putting this giant curtain up to block out the sun.
So
Right.
up in
This
space.
right up in space to put this huge barrier, a physical barrier to have an effect, just like that,
Yeah.
to have an effect on climate change, right? Global warming and CO2, all of that stuff. So that's probably one of the more kind of fringe sounding ideas, but there's other things that have been experimented with already. Some of them are working, right? So I guess geoengineering I see as sort of on this tipping point, about to resolve one way or the other, where we're going to learn either it works or it doesn't work. We can do it or we can't do it, because it's one of those things that if it goes well, we're probably going to do a lot of it, right? We're going to say, oh, this is great. These solutions are happening. If it doesn't go well, if it backfires, we're going to probably say, okay, no more geoengineering. We need to find other approaches. I mean, there's good examples. One of the ones I think I mentioned in the article involves sprinkling crumbled up rocks, like ground up rocks, a certain kind of rock, basalt or something like that, to absorb carbon emissions in the air, CO2. This particular rock can absorb that from the air. At the same time, it is restoring the soil with missing nutrients. We have this issue of soil depletion, where crops are not contained, the soil doesn't contain as many minerals as it could, which makes the crops less nutritious and harder to farm on that soil, and so forth and so on. So if we could have these kind of geoengineering solutions that absorb carbon emissions as well as restore the soil, it's a great solution, right? So if that works, why not roll out more things like that? So I feel like geoengineering is sort of like on a tipping point here, about to go full on, or maybe about to kind of be
Empowering too, the ability to actually be able to take steps as a human to start solving these things. Maybe use our brains to improve the world around us. Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the other examples of geoengineering was kind of like digital twin and computer modeling, right? Using high performance computing, and I think also AI would be involved in, modeling various climate conditions and weather changes, and being proactive about what we do. Now that we really understand that this problem needs to be dealt with, using the options that we have technologically, and that will result in sociological, right? So social questions, community concerns. We need to engage people in these proactive choices. Yeah.
Gen
So the
beta.
next one is Gen Beta. Now this one makes a lot of sense. Why is Gen Beta about to resolve? Because they're about to start being born. Depends who you ask. With all of these generations, it depends who you ask, but some of the think tanks and marketing groups that study generations have said, McCrindle in particular is the one that tells you that Gen Beta will start being born in 2025.
Okay.
So they're about to start being born next year. It's 2024. It's time to start thinking about, what is their legacy? What is their reality, right? What is the zeitgeist they're going to be born into and play a role in creating? Because currently we have Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha is grown up. Some of them, I mean, they started being born around 2011. So, they're getting into the upper teens. They're about to enter college and workforce. So even though we're not done with these previous generations like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, we're about to have another one on the scene. And knowing that the demographic balance is what it is right now, we're really looking to new generations to solve some of these problems that we were talking about, and to
Some of the problems
have
we've caused, right?
the problems we've caused. We need you guys. Yeah, we need them to fix this stuff. We need to give them a good education so they can do that. We need to provide them, with stable communities and, mental health services. And we really need to prepare them for the world that we are leaving for them to inherit. So I think it should be on our radar, because it affects schools, it affects communities, it affects, our livelihoods when we're older, right? These are going to be the young people in the workforce. So I think Gen Beta, as always, generations come in, they change things. So it's time to start wondering and talking about, what are they going to do? What's going to be their legacy? What's going to be their technology, right? What's going to be their key technology? Because we've already had AI and internet. I wonder what they're going to.
I know they're going to be born natives of AI and everything that we're just now getting to. They're born with it. And they're going to grow up with it. How does that change? Yeah, everything. Wow. So the third one you had here is Utopian smart cities. What do you see there?
Oh yeah, that's such an interesting topic. Again, something that's been around forever, these smart cities, but there's a growing number of smart cities in the works right now. A lot of people are familiar with NEOM, which is that big one in Saudi Arabia. They have multiple components. It's got like a tourism aspect, it's got a residential aspect. The place where people will live is a straight line. It's called the line. It's like this straight development of homes and transportation. So you'll basically just move up and down the line, from your home to your job to your grocery store, whatever it might be. And that's just one aspect of it. But Tencent and I think Toyota, I believe it's Toyota with the smart city in Japan called the Woven City, Tencent in China. There's several in the US that are being built by a number of different founders. I mean, some of them are technology oligarchs who are very wealthy that want to start their own kind of like, private city. In Neom, it's very much like a startup community because they have a really big emphasis on sustainability and technology. The one in Japan at the base of Mount Fiji, it's called the Woven City, like I said. And what they're doing is weaving high-tech society with elderly and young families to sort of like a social experiment to see what is this like super smart city environment like when it comes to helping those in our society that need the most help, right? Older people and kids and, parents with young kids. So there's kind of like, they kind of embody these social experiments, right? Where it's sustainability or health or high tech, whatever, convenience, right? Whatever it might be. And I think as we see more and more of these popping up around the globe, it becomes something on the verge of resolution, right? One way, on one side, they may become the norm, right? Maybe all of our cities will someday be smart cities. On the other hand, maybe the residents or the funders and planners will say these smart cities don't work. They're not convenient. They're actually making lives harder. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine that
Oh, yeah.
because it sounds so great, but until we've actually implemented them and seen how they work, we won't really know. So that's what makes it one of those uncertainties that's kind of exciting to explore because we don't know how it's going to turn out. So the futurist imagination can really go wild.
Oh, yeah. It's so interesting because I think a lot of cities were accidental almost. It was a river crossing or two rivers coming together or something that attracted the original settlers, and then the city kind of sprawled from there. And there wasn't a lot of pre-planned purpose. And it's always we're going back and we're trying to renovate an existing city and trying to deal with what we have. But these cities are starting greenfield. Oftentimes there's nothing there, and they can say, in an ideal world, how would we lay out a city and the logistics and the delivery and human nature compatibility? Oh man, so that's going to be such a interesting experiment. I'm looking forward to kind of the post game review almost. How did it work? How do people feel that live there? What works and what doesn't? Absolutely. So you and I have both been in and around futurism for quite some time now. And but in my personal experience, AI there's never been an experience in my career like generative AI, which has the capability of transforming so much so fast. That's my experience, and I'm just in awe of it. I'm just consuming everything I can about it. Tell me your personal experience. Have you seen this kind of thing before, or is this new? Are you feeling the same kinds of things as I am?
No, I think it's very transformative for society. I do agree with the futurists who say, Frank Diana among them, that AI will be the next general purpose technology, right? We're gradually transitioning to that point where AI will be in everything, it'll be everywhere. It'll be like electricity, as they say. We won't even notice it until it's not there, right? We don't think about electricity. I have no idea how electricity works. I mean, all I know is, you flip the switch and it's on. And that's what AI is going to be one day. People will just flip, yeah, here it is. It's in my kitchen. It's in my car. It's in my workplace. It's just here. And it's great. I can't live without it. So I think we're gradually transitioning to that point. And I think it's really similar to what I remember from the 90s. So hard for me to remember those days. But, I was so young. But, it was when the internet came out, it was like life-changing. I happened to be transitioning in early college student at that point. So yeah, it was a complete difference. In high school, we didn't use the internet. In college, we did. It was just like, it was just there. And I haven't stopped since. It's just become a more integral part of my life. So I think that we can probably say the same for AI. It's going to be, there. It's going to be helpful. It's going to improve the standard of living. I mean, I think all in all, it's really cool. But, we're just, as futurists, we are cautious about technologies. That's part of our job. We want to evaluate all the things people may not be thinking about, like the ethical implications, the environmental implications. We look at all the angles. So I definitely have my reservations, but all in all, I'm enjoying it. I'm not a big Chat GPT user, but I do like my talk to text abilities. I'm pretty sure that uses AI. I'm sure it does. But being able to, speak to my phone or my laptop rather than typing is really convenient. So
Oh, yeah. So you and I have both been working on a project where we're looking at the idea of digital assistants and digital coworkers and various potential scenarios for how they might be used. Do you have any impressions or thoughts on that you would like to share with us?
digital coworkers, or what did we've called them, cobots. I like that term. Cobots. It may or may not take a robotic form, but I think that's a really cool concept. Just the idea that everyone could have a personal assistant to do the things that we don't enjoy doing, that take time, things that can be automated away, like, expense reports, timesheets, right? Things like that you have to do, but it would be so much better if it was just automated and you could just sort of, check that did it right or something and then not have
Expense
to worry about it.
reports, Alex.
I've got this idea for expense reports. It has to be hooked up to like your GPS right on your phone. There's like an AI following you and making these little reports. Say, do you want to submit this? Do you want to submit that? That would be convenient. But yeah, stuff like that, stuff that we don't want to do, but we need to do. I mean, we want our expense reports paid, right? We want our money. So it would be so nice to give everyone a personal assistant. And then you could do, so much more. Just it's not really about productivity to me, more about like fulfillment, because I would really like for people to love their jobs, love what they do. And I think if AI can help with that, that's the way to use it.
That's awesome. So to wrap up here today, I'd like to ask our guests if they have books or podcasts or anything like that that you would like to recommend.
Books and podcasts. Let's see. I'm going to go with podcasts because I do listen to a lot of podcasts these days. The Pivot podcast. Now I can't
Oh
remember.
yeah.
Professor G.
Yeah, yeah,
Is it Professor G? I can't,
yeah.
I'm blanking on the guy's name.
Scott
I
Galloway.
like Scott Galloway. I like his podcast. I think he's really interesting. And I like the Atlantic podcast with Derek Thompson, I think is his name. He's one of their writers. He's really good. And I always break up my day with some comedy podcasts. I like the Mark Maron podcast because I don't like to just listen to news and information. You got to take a break. And I like to hear comedy. I like to hear something funny and entertaining. Yeah, I think, let's see, who else do I listen to?
Now
I like
you didn't
political
list
stuff
my
too. So
comedy, my caveman comedy. Come on.
you got to get a caveman comedy podcast to
Okay.
get me on your list.
Okay.
Okay. I'll subscribe to that.
Alex, thanks so much for being our guest today and joining us and giving us just a glimpse into your world as a futurist.
Thank you, Kevin.